So guys, here we are with the Championship kicking off this Friday. We are here today to discuss my official Championship predictions ahead of the upcoming season, and I for one can't wait to jump into it. Now before we do get into my predictions, I must first of all come in with a few caveats that we have to discuss. First things first, the transfer window is still open and a hell of a lot can change between now and the start of the season in terms of how each squad is shaping up. I'm expecting every Championship club to continue to do business right up until the deadline, and one of the biggest deciding factors which could decide quite a few places in the Championship is how each club plays the loan market. Generally we see Premier League clubs not willing to send players out on loan until towards the end of the transfer window, and that's when we see a lot of Championship clubs going ahead and capitalising on that. So take these predictions with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because a lot can change between now and the start of the season and the end of the window. We may need to do an updated prediction video for that, but as things stand right now, I've come up with my 1 to 24 list and I want you guys to get involved with this one as well. Let me know down below what are your predictions for the upcoming season, who's getting in the top 6 and who's going down as the bottom 3. I think it's quite an unpredictable year, especially for the teams in mid-table. I think there's not a lot between any of them. Enough of me rambling on though, guys. If you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. 500 likes would be appreciated. But without any further ado, let's get into the predictions. So starting out at the foot of the table, I have gone for Rotherham. Seems like a bit of an obvious pick at the moment, but things can change quite quickly if a few more acquisitions are made. It's a tough one with Rotherham really, because we've seen over their last 3 Championship campaigns them struggle to go ahead and adapt to the level. I think what's really hurt Rotherham in the past is a slow start to the season, and they've only really got that competitiveness about them towards the end of the year, and by that point it was always too late. I do like some of the acquisitions that they've made defensively so far. I like some of the options they have throughout midfield as well. The area where I particularly see them coming up short is where is the consistent goal threat going to come from within this side. Last season in League One, Freddie Ladapo and Michael Smith contributed towards 43% of the goals they scored. Both those players have left. They have been busy in terms of replacing them. Connor Washington and Tom Eaves have come in, and while they will offer a work ethic in the final third, I'm not sure they'll offer a consistent goal threat, which could see Rotherham getting over the line this season. So as much as I rate Paul Warne and how competitive this Rotherham squad might be, I think they may just be cut off. Coming in 23rd place, I've then gone for Birmingham. It's a bit of a topsy-turvy situation at Birmingham off the pitch at this point in time, and that's affecting proceedings on the pitch at this moment. For 6 consecutive seasons now, Birmingham have failed to finish above 17th place in the Championship, and this does have the feeling of a season where they could finally drop. I do like almost everything that I've read and heard about John Eustace as a manager. Obviously, he's coming into his first managerial gig here with Birmingham, but it does have a little bit of a feeling of maybe right manager, wrong time with the situation at Blues. They've been quite hamstrung really in terms of what they can do in terms of their business because of this potential takeover which has been looming over the club. There's even been some speculation about Eustace's future as a whole if that takeover is to go through, which I think is absolutely crazy. In terms of quality though, looking at their potential starting 11 going into next season, I'm not sure it quite stacks up to everyone else in the Championship at this point in time. Djukovic and Deeney aren't exactly getting any younger at the front end of the pitch, and defensively they were one of the worst setups in the Championship last season, averaging 1.6 goals conceded per game. So unless anything drastic was to happen with that potential takeover, some more bodies coming in through the door, I think this could be a tough season for Birmingham. And as my final relegation spot, I've gone for Reading, but I must admit I'm not entirely sold on this one at the moment, and I must admit that if a few scenarios do play out in their favour this season, I actually think that what they're currently working with could be enough to survive. However, I still have my doubts over a few areas which I'll go on to explain. First things first, if you look at this Reading squad, and particularly at the top end of the pitch, Reading are more than good enough to have the goals to go ahead and survive this season, with the likes of Lucas João, Yaku Mete, Ovie Ejaria, and you add Shane Long into the mix as well. That's a decent crop of forward-thinking players, and I think there'll be plenty of goals to be shared around between those players. My concern then comes from the potential availability of all of those players and their injury records in the past. Take Lucas João, for example. Last season, he averaged a goal every 188 minutes in the Championship, which, if it was to be averaged out over an entire season, he was to be fully fit for every match, he'd go on to score 22 goals. However, the problem comes from the fact that during his last 4 Championship seasons, the average amount of games that Lucas João has started is just 21.5, and that availability is a little bit of a worry for me, because I feel like a lot of their attacking hopes are pinned on him and Yaku Mete, who's coming back from a long-term injury. Those players are huge difference makers though, and if they do stay fit for an entire season, then Reading probably will stay up, to be honest. I'm just sort of basing this prediction on the likelihood that one of them does pick up an injury for a few months. Then you have to take into consideration the losses they've had throughout midfield, with John Swift and his importance to that side last season, Laurent and Rinomota as well. And to add on top of that, they were the worst defensively set up side in the Championship last season, conceding 87 goals, although it does look like Inter's been experimenting with a few new tactical tweaks which could go ahead and help them in that regard. I'm not entirely convinced that Lumley's a massive upgrade on Southwood either. Last season, out of every Championship goalkeeper, he ranked 41st in the Championship for save percentage. And added on top of that, Paul Ince's relative inexperience could mean that if Reading are dragged into a relegation battle, he's not got the tools to go ahead and turn things around. But a lot of this prediction is based on circumstance. I don't think Reading are as bad as a few people are currently thinking, but a few injuries to that squad, and suddenly they're relying on youngsters, and things could get a little bit messy. In 21st place and just beating the drop, I've then gone for Wigan Athletic. Now, I do expect Wigan to do some more business between now and the end of the window, and at this point of recording, I was a little bit 50-50, to be honest, in terms of Wigan and Reading for that last relegation spot. What I would say about Wigan, though, is I think they've got a lot of potential upside under a manager like Liam Richardson, and coming off the back of the momentum they got from winning League One last season. Generally speaking, the champions of League One have a relatively decent record in terms of survival in the first season in the Championship as well, so there's that to take into consideration. I like the addition of Ryan Niambi. I think a really solid addition from Blackburn Rovers, but other than that, they've been quite thin on the ground in terms of their recruitment, which has been a little bit surprising. They are currently putting a lot of faith in the current crop of players collectively making that step up from League One to the Championship, which could go either way. I'm really excited to see Callum Lang especially at this level, although I do still have a few doubts over a few of their other players. Will Keane especially, I'm not sure he's going to get anywhere close to replicating his numbers from League One last season in the Championship. Right now, I think a loan signing or two in a few key positions would go a long way in solidifying Wigan's place in the Championship, but as of right now, I think they'll just scrape survival. Coming in 20th place, I've then gone for Blackpool, so a slight fall off from their finish last season. At the end of last season, I was quite high on Blackpool's chances of progressing next season, but after the summer they've had, I've gone for a slight fall off. As much as a cliche as it sounds, second season syndrome can also be a thing that kicks into place here as well. From the surprise departure of Neil Critchley to the relatively slow start to the transfer business, I'm not quite as high on Blackpool at this point in time as I probably was this time last season. In the Championship, a manager like Michael Appleton does have a point to prove, and he's already shown a few connections in the loan market, and I'm sure that Blackpool will continue to pursue a few players in that regard. The future of Josh Bowler still very much hangs up in the air, to be honest. I don't think he'll be a monumental loss if he was to leave for the right fee. I think he went off the boil a little bit towards the end of last season. I think that they could probably make do without him and then go ahead and reinvest that money in a few other key areas of the squad. The league will be quite competitive at the bottom of the table this time around though, and with no point deductions of any other sides to take into consideration this time around, I think we may see a slight drop off from Blackpool. Coming in 19th place, I've then gone for Sunderland. I do have them as the highest performing of the newly promoted clubs, but I'm not really sure what to think of Sunderland at this point in time, because of the business they have done so far, I've been really impressed with. Daniel Ballard especially, I think, is a wonderful long-term investment for Sunderland, and right now immensely improves that back line. You know, I thought it was brilliant out on loan at Millwall last season. I must admit though, I was expecting Sunderland to be a little bit more busy up until this point in the transfer market, and I still think they have quite a ways to go in fully making this squad competitive for next season. As a Preston fan, I must admit I do massively rate Alex Neil especially in his first few seasons at a club. I think Alex Neil is a brilliant impact manager, and while that impact is still very much hot at Sunderland, you know, coming coming off the back of that promotion. Sunderland have a lot of potential upside this season, and maybe I've been a little bit harsh by predicting them in 19th, but I still think they've got a ways to go in terms of bulking up their squad with championship quality. One or two more quality additions could absolutely see Sunderland soar up the league this season. I'm excited about a few of their players there, Ross Stewart, Embleton especially, but right now I think they've still got a little bit of a ways to go in the transfer market. Coming in 18th place, I've then gone for Huddersfield Town. Now, Huddersfield made me look immensely silly last season. I predicted them to finish in the relegation zone. In the end, they made it all the way to the playoff final, and I am potentially putting myself in the firing line to look silly again with having them this low down in my prediction, but hear me out for this one. After the playoff final, I think we all accepted that O'Brien and Toffolo were likely to move on. I do think they are both massive losses from this squad, particularly O'Brien. Last season for Huddersfield, both of them were their most used outfield players in terms of minutes played, so that's a massive gap that needs to be filled in initially. I do like the look of some of their recruitment so far as well. I think they've been quite savvy with picking up some deals from League One. Kasumu and Radoni especially look like two really nice pickups to go ahead and add a little bit more competition into that midfield, but I'm not immediately expecting them to hit the ground running, and it does feel like this squad is heading into a little bit of a transitional phase from Carlos Corberan moving on as well. The biggest question mark is probably because of Corberan moving on. Had he not gone ahead and done that, I probably would have had them significantly higher up. Danny Schofield is a blank canvas in terms of what we have to expect from him at this point in time. Generally speaking, internal hirings within the Championship haven't exactly gone all too well if we look at previous track records of other clubs, but there have been exceptions to that. Added on to that, we've then got the likes of Colwill, who added more depth and quality into that backline, and Sonani, who are no longer at the club this season. And will someone like Danny Ward be able to replicate a 14 goal plus season this time around? I'm not so sure. What they do have in their favour is one of the best goalkeepers in the Championship, and Sorba Thomas, and as long as he's at the club, I'm sure they'll score a bucket full of set pieces once again. So maybe I have been a little bit harsh on this prediction, but I'm just thinking that with a playoff final hangover to take into consideration, a manager moving on, and a weaker squad this time around that's going through a transition with an inexperienced manager, maybe a significant drop off from last time, but I'm happy to be proved wrong on that one. In 17th place, I've then gone for Hull City, so a slight improvement on last season, but realistically, Hull are a total wildcard coming into this next season. They could finish in the relegation zone or the playoffs, and I'd be absolutely none the wiser come the end of the season, because anything could happen with this completely new side which is being assembled at this point in time. I do think that in terms of continuity, the losses of Honeyman and Lewis Potter especially do hurt them a little bit at this point in time in terms of guarantees, players we can bank on for next season with Hull. And last season it felt like Shota Valades was trying to coach a new brand of football which wasn't quite coming off, but theoretically so, with a more technical group of players that he will be working with this season. You'd imagine that that will be a lot more fluid this time around. Although with how last season went under him, I do still have a few reservations over him at this point in time, but I'm sure they'll be ironed out over the season as we see more of him in this Hull side. They've pretty much signed a completely new spine to their team, and while this is incredibly exciting at the moment and the quality they've added to the squad is unquestionable, I do think things will take time to go ahead and gel into place, and I think that this is a little bit of a season for the new owners at Hull to sort of dip the toes into the water, see what works at this level, and then next season might be the year where they fully commit to attacking the league. Maybe a little bit similar to how Swansea were last season, where the first half of the season under Russ Martin was a little bit of a mess with, new players coming in, adapting to a new system, a lot of fresh faces around the club, but by the end of the season they looked like a little bit of a force. I think there'll be a lot of inconsistency with Hull this season because of all the new players that are coming in and all the plates they're trying to spin at once. But if, and it is a big if, things do click for them this season, then they could be significantly higher than where I've got them placed right here. I've gone quite safe with this prediction, to be honest, because Hull could soar up the league and I wouldn't be massively surprised. They are the most I'm unsure about in terms of any of these predictions at the moment. So Hull fans, I'd like to know from you guys, what would you class as success at this point in time, and what would you realistically bank on in terms of a finish this season? In 16th place, I've I've then gone for Blackburn Rovers. During the second half of last season, they averaged just over 1 point per game, which, if factored over an entire championship season, would see them finishing on around about 50 points, which would have them just above the relegation zone. Added to that, the losses of the likes of Joe Rothwell, Darragh Lenihan and Gene Van Heck especially, their squad is looking weaker at this point in time than it was last time around. However, I do think there are causes for optimism at Ewood Park. While Tony Mowbray certainly had his plaudits over the years for Blackburn, I do think it was the right time for him to go ahead and move on, and under John Dahl Thomason, I do think there is a higher ceiling for what Blackburn could go on to become in years to come. If Dak can stay fit for this season, then I think he's a real asset coming back into the side. I expect more from someone like Ryan Hedges, and I think it could be a big season for John Buckley as well. Kaminski, I rate up there as one of the best goalkeepers in the Championship as well. The reason I've gone a little bit conservative with this Blackburn prediction is because, as of recording, we don't know what the future holds for Ben Brereton Diaz, and I do think that whether he stays or goes will have a massive influence on where Blackburn finish this season. If he stays, they'll probably be a little bit higher than this. If he leaves and they don't adequately reinvest that money into the rest of the squad, then this season could get a little bit tricky. Blackburn are another one of the sides with a new manager coming into the league. Feels like a little bit of a transitional year with the players that have left and are there or thereabouts in this mid-table region. You can jumble about all these teams really. Coming in 15th place, I've then gone for Cardiff City. Now, speaking of transitional years, my God, have Cardiff been busy in this transfer market. 12 players have signed for Cardiff as of recording right now, and it feels like even more bodies are going to be coming in the door over these next few weeks. I think that a massive clear-out was needed at Cardiff at the end of last season. A lot of the high earners that were getting on in age, and generally speaking, the average age of this squad needed to be lowered down, and they needed to add quality and depth into several areas of the pitch. And I feel like they've gone ahead and done that with this transfer window. I like the look of how Cardiff were progressing under Steve Morrison last season as well. I think he's a promising up-and-coming coach that I think a lot of people had a fairly positive opinion on at the end of last season. And while I do think this season will be a vast improvement on last time for Cardiff, I think this is another case of allowing players to gel into a new system, new team, relatively new manager. And because of that, Cardiff will probably have a few inconsistent patches throughout the season, which means they're not quite up and around the top half, but anywhere around 15th, this sort of region, few places higher, couple places lower, I think will be where or whereabouts Cardiff are this year. Coming in 14th place, I've then gone for Stoke City. Now, as we claim with every season, I do think there's still a lot of potential upside with this Stoke squad, and I think that at some points of the season they probably will be flirting in and amongst the playoff picture, but ultimately we tend to see one or two implosions along the way for Stoke in terms of potential injury crisis creeping in, losing momentum or form at key points of the season, and still a few questions over Michael O'Neill and how he's handled this group over the past few seasons. I do like some of the business that they've done so far. They've been quite savvy with working on both the loan market and picking up players on free transfers. You know, Josh Laurent, an excellent acquisition in that aspect. I think a lot of people are banking on what's Dwight Gale going to be like this season in the Championship. In terms of history, I think he's got the second best minutes per goal ratio in the Championship, so if they can provide him with that service, he is as close to guaranteed goals as you can get, although there are question marks over his availability and fitness because of the lack of game time that he's had over the past few seasons. On paper, I still think there's a lot to like about this Stoke squad, but ultimately I think they've let us down one too many times over the past, and so I think a lot of people will be quite conservative with their predictions for Stoke, and I think I'm doing that with putting them around about 14th. Coming in 13th place, we then have Queen's Park Rangers, another newbie coming into the Championship this season in terms of Michael Beale, this being his first managerial gig, but another manager who I am very much looking forward to seeing being given his opportunity. In this part of the table we have plenty of clubs who are going through transitional phases, so realistically you can place these teams in any particular order really, and I wouldn't be all too fussed. But in terms of QPR, fingers crossed they don't have another goalkeeping crisis this time around, and I think that looking further up the pitch, there's quite a lot to like about the starting 11 of this QPR setup. I think that defensively they've got some nice options. Going into midfield, I think it's just pure vibes. I think that Sharon Willock will be a hell of a lot of fun this season, added on to the fact they've got Taylor Richards in that position as well, who I think will be a lot of fun for QPR. I like the addition of Tyler Roberts for the season. I always quite like the look of him in the Championship for Leeds. I think there are a few question marks maybe over another number 9 being needed. Dykes can do a job, Bond not so sure about, and Roberts could potentially play that position. But my only real gripe with QPR comes from a lack of squad depth after that starting 11 in a few key areas, which could turn out to be a little bit of an issue. But a new manager in Michael Beale coming into the season, some nice creative options throughout that midfield. I think QPR will be alright this season. Coming in 12th place, I've then gone for Bristol City. I've bumped them up 5 places from their finish last time around, and I've got a better feeling about them this time around, it has to be said. There are still issues which need to be ironed out there. Defensively, they were all over the place last season in terms of their defensive setup and structure, and I think that Pearson needs to especially work on that with this squad this season. But in terms of transfers, I think it's been a case of quality over quantity. They have looked to improve that defensive lineup with the introduction of Cal Naismith on a free transfer, which I think is a great pickup. Kane Wilson coming in as well adds more depth to that right hand side, who I'm looking forward to seeing. And most so with Bristol City, it's been a case of them keeping hold of players who I thought they might have lost this summer. Hando Masengo still a Bristol City player as of recording. Anthony Semenyo still a Bristol City player. They've even rejected offers for him, so they clearly have that ambition as a club to go ahead and progress, and it's down to Pearson and this group, who I think are capable of pushing up higher in the league. In terms of that forward three and that dynamic between them last season, Vyman, Martin and Semenyo, I thought they all bounced off each other brilliantly. A real threat on transitions and counter-attacks. If they can sort out that defensive record this season, then I see no reason why Bristol City can't push up the league a little bit and get that little bit more consistency that they so desperately lacked last season. Coming in 11th place, I think I'm for my team, Preston North End. Pretty standard finish for Preston really, in and around 11th place. But I think a lot of North End fans, myself included, are quite looking forward to this next upcoming season really. If we look at our record last season from the point of which where Ryan Lowe took over until the end of the season, we were mixing it in and amongst the top 6 in terms of the points we actually recruited from that point onwards. Added on to the fact that I think it's been a slow and steady transfer window so far, but with the promise of what's potentially still to come with a few deals which are being talked about in the pipeline, I think there's no reason to suggest why Preston shouldn't go ahead and progress on last season's finish, where we got off to an awful start under Frankie McAvoy. There seems to be more consistency throughout the club in terms of what Ryan Lowe's after, the structure we're building towards. As things stand right now, I do admit that we are a little bit reliant on Emile Rees coming up with goals. I think we do need to address that with another forward or two and some more depth into those wing-back areas. But other than that, I really like the additions of Woodman and Brady so far. And Woodburn potentially gives us a different dynamic if he's able to hit the ground running. Next up then, and in 10th place, I've gone for Millwall. Now, while they may have lost their talisman in Jed Wallace, I dare say that they've got a little bit more of a balanced squad heading into this next season. I really like the recruitment that they've done so far, and they could easily go on to finish higher than this 10th place I've gone ahead and predicted them in. I like the addition of Benicophobe on a permanent basis. George Honeyman, I think, is a brilliant pickup as well, will suit Millwall right down to the ground in terms of what they require from their midfielders, and then the pickups from Leeds in Charlie Cresswell and Jamie Shackleton as well, and the player who could make all the difference in the final third in Zane Fleming. May take him a little bit of time to go ahead and adapt to the new league, but him coming in for a club record fee I think is really exciting stuff for Millwall this time round. We can generally bank on Millwall having one of the tightest defensive units in the league, and I think that'll be the case this season. The only reason I've got them down in 10th and not a little bit higher up is I think with Rowett maybe there'll be one too many draws in there again, and that may just leave them a little bit behind that playoff pack. But if that wasn't to be the case, then Millwall have got every chance of being up there in the playoff mix this season for me. And I think the same could be said for Coventry as well. Generally speaking, every season under Mark Robins, Coventry have continued to build upon the platform that they set for themselves last season, and progression for Coventry this time round would be a consistent playoff charge. And I think we could see every chance of that happening for Coventry this time around, more so than the players that they brought in this season. I think it's been more impressive the players that they've actually been able to keep hold of. I think we all expected at least one of Callum O'Hare, Victor Gyökeres or Gustavo Hamer to probably move on this summer, but as of recording right now, they've kept hold of all three. They've still got that spine of that squad from last season fully intact and have added a few pieces on top of that. Jonathan Panzo looks quite promising on loan from Nottingham Forest for the season to add a little bit more quality into that back line. And while offers have come in for some of their star players, they've been quite resilient to go ahead and accept any of them. So clearly there is that ambition there from behind the scenes to go ahead and back the manager at the club. And I think Coventry have got every chance this season of being up and around the playoff mix. I really do. Coming in at 8th place, I think going for Swansea City. Now, while they may have lost Flynn Downs and what he added to that midfield, they are now a full season into the Russell Martin era, and it started to feel like during the second half of last season, the penny had finally dropped in terms of play style, and particularly in the final third with some really nice link-ups between Jamie Patterson, Joel Perreault and Michael Obafemi. Obafemi and Perreault especially, both more than capable of hitting 15 plus each this season, and I think that's quite a rarity throughout the Championship. The fact that Swansea have all that firepower and then all the goals that Patterson is going to chip in with throughout midfield as well. I still think the squad could do with bulking up in a few positions, and I'm sure that that will be done with a few more loan deals which are to come over the next few weeks in the window. But I like the introduction of Harry Darling in terms of another centre-half coming into that squad. Brilliant fit in terms of style of play coming over from MK Dons. Joe Allen gives them a different option in midfield as well. He joins on a free transfer, and overall I'm quite positive on Swansea's chances this season of being up and around the playoff mix, albeit still think they may concede too many goals to be right in there in the top 6 this season, but the amount of goals they'll score, I think they'll be there or thereabouts. Next up then, and in 7th place and just missing out on the playoffs this time around, I've gone for Luton Town. Now I must admit, at the start of the summer when Cal Naismith left, I was a little bit fearful for Luton in terms of if there was going to be a bit of a mass exodus from that squad that did so well last season, but after his departure, that's not really been the case. And I go as far to say that in terms of the overall balance throughout the team, Luton are actually looking a little bit stronger this time around than they were this time last season, albeit there might be a bit more competition up at the top end of the Championship. Really like some of the acquisitions that they've made, especially at the top end of the pitch. Coley Woodrow and Colton Morris, I think two brilliant pickups, which takes a little bit of the burden off Adebayo, whereas maybe at times last season there was a little bit of an over-reliance on him. Luke Freeman, I think, is a decent gamble for Luton to take in their situation if they can get him playing another really exciting creative outlet. Alfie Doherty I quite like for Luton's style of play, and I think that Ethan Horvath is an upgrade in the goalkeeping department as well. Only potential area to look into is a Naismith replacement, whether Luton already feel as if they have that replacement already within the squad who they're ready to promote into that position, or they will dip into the loan market to go after another player as that left-sided centre-half. But all things considered, I like the depth that Luton have added this season. I think they'll be right up there once again in terms of the playoff mix, albeit the competition may just cut them off from that top 6 this time around, but I think they'll be there or thereabouts, and I really rate Nathan Jones as a manager as well. Making it into the playoffs in 6th place, I've then gone for Burnley. Now, Burnley under Vincent Kompany, I do think have a lot of potential upside. It's been quite an exciting transfer window so far, whereas at the start of the window, I think a lot of people were quite fearful for Burnley with the loss of players that we were expecting, and a lot of the big hitters that have actually left the club. But in terms of how they've gone ahead and transformed this squad around in the image of Vincent Kompany and the general profile of players that he was after, yeah, Burnley I think will be right up there in the mix this season. The average age of all the players they've signed this season is just over 22 years old, and while that does bring a lot of promise, and I think that in years to come this Burnley squad has a really high ceiling, it may lead to a little bit of naivety potentially in the first half of this season where Kompany tries to properly iron out his new way of playing as Burnley sort of edge away from the Dyche era. Added on top of that, the reliable players that have left with the likes of, you know, your Nick Popes, your Tarkovskis, your Ben Mees, the real stalwarts of this Burnley side. Defensively, they might not quite be as watertight as they have been in previous years. Collins to add on top of that as well. But moving up throughout the pitch, I think it's a really exciting young spine of players who will be alongside those players who have stuck around from the Premier League. You know, your big hitters like your Josh Brownhills, who's cut it at this level before. Corner, if he sticks around maybe. Scott Twine I think is their most exciting addition, but I really like some of the acquisitions they made in midfield with the likes of Josh Cullen, and Samuel Bastian coming in as well. Vincent Kompany is also a coach who really intrigues me. I think that because of their potential naivety, bedding in a lot of new players and a lot of them getting used to the league in terms of Kompany as well, that may mean that they're slightly behind the pack in terms of an automatic promotion race, but I do think they'll be right in there in the playoffs this season. Coming in 5th place, I've then gone for West Brom. It has been an incredibly exciting transfer window from the Baggies so far. In terms of the quality they've added into this team, undoubtedly they are a much better proposition coming into this next season. Although I still think we all have our doubts over West Brom after how last season materialised, and they probably were the biggest underachievers from last time around. With the likes of John Swift and Jed Wallace coming in, it's a hell of a lot of creativity, which is already added to a side which created a lot of chances last season. West Brom's main issues last season came from the fact that their conversion rate was amongst the worst sides in the league. I think one of the most exciting players for West Brom next season is actually going to be Daryl Dike. He arrived in January last season, picked up that injury, and we barely got to see anything out of him, but him in a front line alongside Jed Wallace and Carlin Grant, there's chances to be made there and there's goals to be had with John Swift playing behind them. Potentially their most important signing of this window though is actually Okeyukashlu. I think that depth in holding midfield and quality in that position was a massive problem area for West Brom last season. I'm glad they've addressed it with that signing. Arguably the best player in the league in his position. Defensively, they could probably still do with a few more bodies, and I still have some reservations over Steve Bruce because of how the second half of last season unfolded under him, although to be fair, it wasn't necessarily his squad that he was working with, although going off previous track records, maybe with how the Villa job went at this level, there are doubts to be had there. But in terms of the quality within the squad, the expectations at the club this season, it's got to be top 6 as a minimum, surely, for West Brom this time around. Coming in 4th place, I've then gone for Sheffield United. From this point onwards, I was quite close between all the teams who I had from 4th to 1st place, and I think that the differences between all these sides will probably be decided over these next few weeks and how they actually finish off their transfer business. But as things stand in the state of play right now, I do think Sheffield United will be comfortably in the playoffs and capable of pushing on maybe for an automatic promotion spot. In the second half of last season, from the point of which Heckingbottom took over Sheffield United, they were right on par with Fulham in terms of the points they collected from that point onwards. Time will tell how much of a hole Morgan Gibbs-White will leave from last season and his importance to that side, but there's a plethora of talent throughout this Sheffield United squad. Ahed Mahozik, I think, is a brilliant addition in at the back as well. By all accounts, looks like a really promising player. We saw how good Tommy Doyle was during his loan spell last season at Cardiff, and by all accounts, Sheffield United aren't done in the window just yet, and they are targeting a few more players. The only area where I'm slightly apprehensive about Sheffield United is a consistent goal threat. I'm sure that Billy Sharp will continue to chip in with the goals, but it does feel as if they are hanging their hat on one of their maybe underperforming players from last season coming to the forefront this season, whether that is a Brewster who chips in with the goals if he stays fit all season, or someone else along that line. Keeping Sander Berge for the full season and keeping him fit will be absolutely huge from Sheffield United. I like the general makeup of this squad. I really like the look of them during the second half of last season, and a few more additions could even push them onto that next level, but right now I'd have them well within the top 6. Coming in 3rd place, I've then gone for Middlesbrough. Now, I must admit, I am playing a little bit of guesswork with this prediction as things stand. I feel like the Jed Spence transfer hasn't helped Middlesbrough in the fact that that one rumbled on for so long. It would have been so helpful had that transfer gone through right at the start of the window, and then Middlesbrough could have properly got underway with all of their transfer business. Of the business that they have done so far, I think they picked up some brilliant players. Lenny Han improves them at the back. Stefan's a massive improvement in terms of their goalkeeping department, and Giles, I think, is an absolute brilliant option down that left-hand side. Arguably, Borough have two of the best wing-backs in the league now, with Giles on the left and Jones on the right. Where this squad is looking light at the moment is quite obvious. Up front, they've got almost nothing at this point in time. They will go ahead and sign players, but as of recording, it's difficult to nail down Borough to a finalised prediction without fully knowing what Chris Wilder will be working with this season. Wilder is one of the best managers in the league. He already has that promotion on his CV, and we saw the blueprint of what he was capable of doing during his tenure there last season. I think that Borough have that potential to really step onto a new level this time around if they get that recruitment spot on. There's also a bit of a question mark over Marcus Tavernier. Will he stay? Will he go? As of recording right now, which is a problem for Borough. And maybe they just left themselves with a little bit too much to do to go ahead and break into that top two, because I do think they've got the potential to go ahead and do that. But if they smash it for the rest of this transfer market, I think they'll be right up there with the top two. If not, and things are a bit more drawn out, then I think they will be in the playoffs as a minimum. And you can probably tell what's going to happen from this point onwards. Coming in second place, I am going for Watford at this point in time, but a lot of what I just said there about Middlesbrough also applies to this Watford squad at the moment, but from a different point of view. With Middlesbrough, we're waiting on additions being made into that squad, and while Watford certainly do need their squad bulking up, midfield and defence are two areas where I think Watford will continue to look into throughout this window. If they keep hold of the big hitters who are still at the club, who I don't think any of us expected still to be there, then I think Watford will be right up there in terms of automatic promotion this season. As of recording right now, Emmanuel Dennis and Ismail Assar are both still Watford players, which is absolutely huge. Added on to that as well, a competent manager like Rob Edwards, and suddenly Watford I think are looking like an interesting proposition for this new upcoming season. They've still got a sprinkling of the players who were promoted from the Championship last time around, who I think will have got better since then. João Pedro being a prime example of that, who I think is going to have a huge role to play for Watford this season. And there have been some interesting pickups so far, albeit a few unknowns in terms of Watford's recruitment. But I'm putting a lot of faith here into Rob Edwards, obviously a very promising manager from his time at Forest Green with getting them promoted. And the quality that still remains within this Watford squad, I think is almost enough to carry them up and around this automatic promotion zone. Which means coming in and winning the Championship this season for me, once again we do have Norwich coming in at the top of the tree. Now I must admit I am more unsure about Norwich this time than I have been in previous seasons gone by, primarily so because a lot has changed at Norwich since they were last in the Championship. Daniel Farke, who we could always bank on being one of, if not the best managers in the Championship in terms of style of play and what we came to expect from Norwich, is no longer at the club, and Dean Smith is now at the helm. Smith needs to go ahead and establish a clear and concise pattern of play, which I don't think was necessarily present at Norwich last season in the Premier League. He needs to nail that down quite sharpish in the Championship this season, although as we've seen with Norwich in previous promotion campaigns gone by, they've not always actually been the fastest of starters to Championship seasons, but as the year goes on they generally tend to progress and get better, and I think that could be the case with Norwich this season as well. Generally speaking, looking through their squad, I think in terms of quality that's currently there, it is still a squad which ranks as one of the best in the Championship for me throughout that team. Tim Krul, proven at this level, one of the best shot stoppers in the league. I think in Giannoulis and Aarons, they've got two of the best fullbacks in the Championship. A solid base in terms of the defence with Gibson and Hanley. Up front, they've probably got the best striker in the Championship in Teemu Pukki. In the Championship, he averages a goal every 132 minutes, and I'm expecting him to hit 25 plus this season. The biggest uncertainty I probably have with this Norwich side is over their midfield, actually. I think that could be a potential problem area where Smith needs to carry on doing some work with, but they have recruited in this area. Isaac Hayden's come in, although he's injured at the start of the season, and the same for Gabriel Sara as well. Arguably the most exciting addition into the Championship this season in terms of the money that's been laid down for him. Emi Buendia is no longer at the club, which could prove to be a problem, as he's obviously been a key part of their promotion campaigns in years gone by, but I think that the likes of Todd Cantwell, Rashica, Sinani and a few others chipping in will be adequate creativity behind Pukki to provide him with the chances. And then you've also got the likes of Jordan Hugill and maybe even someone like Josh Sargent who can step up to the plate in the Championship. So while I do still have some question marks over Dean Smith and this squad, I think that as soon as the muscle memory kicks into place, the quality is undoubtedly there within that Norwich squad to be going on and winning the league this this season. But guys, there we have it. Those are my championship predictions heading into this upcoming season as things stand. Like I say, plenty can change between now and the end of the transfer window. I probably will have to do a little bit of an updated version of this in terms of how the events actually unfold within the rest of this transfer market, but as things stand right now, that's what I'm thinking for each club. So do get your comments down below. What are you thinking for where I've placed your club? Do you think I've been quite kind to you, or do you think I've been a little bit too harsh? Do let me know down below, and I want you guys to put your money where your mouth is. Get your 1 to 24s down there as well. I'll be reacting to them at the end of the season along with these predictions as well. But apart from that, guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for some regular championship content. I am buzzing to get into this new season. I'm sure that you guys are as well. Thanks for tuning in though, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.